Hello and welcome to Life in Focus, a special Life in Focus for Black History Month. My name's Stephen Akinsanya, and in this edition we will be celebrating Black excellence at the bar. It's an honor to be guiding you through this conversation with my guests, that we recognize the past, reflect on the present, and inspire the future of our profession. Now, when we think about the English bar, we conjure up images of wigs, gowns, and centuries of tradition that come to mind. But what is often less visible is that history are the stories of Black pioneers, men and women who broke those barriers, stood firm against prejudice, and carved out space for themselves and for those who would follow. As part of my research, I look back, and of course I'm always obsessed with who was the first, and I, in my research, found that Christian Frederick Cole, a young man from Sierra Leone who went to Oxford University, no less, was called to the bar in 1883. He became the very first African-American student to be called to the bar here in England. Further research revealed that Stella Thomas, a Nigerian, was called to the bar here in 1933. She too studied at Oxford and was a member of Middle Temple. A century later, figures like Dame Linda Dobbs, the first non-white person appointed as a High Court judge, reminded us once again that excellence has no single face, no single background. So today we're going to talk about these trailblazers and ask, what did it take for them to succeed? What lessons can we learn from their journeys? And how do we ensure their legacy continues to inspire the next generation of Black barristers, advocates, and judges? This is more than history. This is about honoring courage, celebrating excellence, and ensuring that the bar, one of the oldest professions in this country, truly reflects the society it serves. So I'm pleased to have special guests with me to discuss these issues and more. Three very close friends in my profession. I welcome firstly Nicola Williams. Nicola was called to the bar in 1985. Started her career as a barrister in private practice, specializing in criminal law. And then between 2001 and 2020, she held 4 ombudsman roles with the PCA and then the IPCC, dealing with allegations of police misconduct up to and including deaths in custody, and as the complaints commissioner for the Cayman Islands, no less. She's the first ever ombudsman to serve in a role with the Service Complaints Ombudsman for the UK Armed Forces, and also she is a Crown Court recorder, sitting since 2010, and a bencher of Lincoln's Inn since 2024. She is also an author of 3 legal thrillers. Without Prejudice was selected for the Black Britain Writing Back series by Bernardine Evaristo, and Until Proven Innocent was the winner of the Diverse Book Awards Reader's Choice Award 2024, and Killer Instinct is her latest novel. Nicola, I welcome you back to Life in Focus. Welcome back to the platform.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I'm really looking forward to what I know is going to be a brilliant program.
Fantastic. And I'm also joined by Mark Robinson. Mark was called to the bar in 2020. Mark is regularly instructed for matters in the Crown Court and appears in the Court of Appeal regularly. He's a member and tenant, should I say, at Garden Court Chambers. He's an experienced gangs practitioner and accepts instructions for serious youth violence and drug-related offences. Mark previously assisted with the research of several commissioned reports, from Postcodes to Profit and the Lammy Review. And I should also mention that Mark is the creator of the Black Silk Initiative, assisted by another guest of mine, Alex Taylor-Camara, now in its 2nd successive year. I'm hoping that Alex will be able to join us on the platform, and I will introduce him if he is able to join. But for now, I welcome both of you to Life in Focus again, and a special edition as we celebrate Black excellence at the bar. Welcome, Nicola, and welcome, Mark.
Yeah.
Now, I want to perhaps tip a nod to some pioneers of the 20th century. When I think about my own journey starting in 1993, and some of the names I used to hear, names that Nicola will obviously be familiar with, and I know that Mark would have become familiar with these names in his own research into the profession. But I mentioned names like Dr. John Roberts, King's Counsel, Rudy Narayan, John Perry, King's Counsel, Len Woodley, King's Counsel, Ika Peart, King's Counsel, Anesta Weeks, Patricia Dangor, Charlotte Boati, who took over 12 Old Square after it was set up by Mavis Gibson in 1965. And these are names that conjure up all sorts of feelings when I recall them and think about the challenges. So Nicola, I wanted to start with you because you can go back all the way to 1985. And just look, they're not here to tell us their stories, but
it's a good thing I'm not a person who's sensitive about her age. She was very proud of all the things that I achieved. So.
There's nothing, no problem with age here.
Yeah.
But Nicola, when I read out these names and I talk about our own personal journeys into the law, can we reflect for a moment on the challenges that they undoubtedly must have faced in accessing things like pupillage and tenancy? And perhaps we can talk a bit about ghetto sets as they existed then and what those actually were.
Yes, you're absolutely right. This takes me back to what I call the bad old days, because even though I was called 40 years this year in November, I certainly remember when I started and people who had been called much longer than that, like the names that you mentioned, John Roberts and Rudy Narayan and Len Woodley and Patricia Dangle, who's also a great friend, very great friend, and was my judicial mentor, actually. So, but in those days, people used to openly and without shame describe an all-black set of chambers as ghetto chambers, with the implication that those people who are in those sets of chambers are second-rate and they didn't know what they were doing and don't take your work there, where often nothing could be further from the truth. The reason why those chambers were set up was because, quite frankly, people couldn't find pupillage in certain sets of chambers, and that was a disgraceful part of the bar's history for quite a long time, actually. I know things have changed. Sometimes I wonder how much things have changed, but certainly I know that things are not where they were in terms of diversity in chambers. But back in the day, there were people who were really, really good, but were in a way forced to set up chambers on their own. In a strange sort of way, though, it probably in some ways was very good, because at least you had other people who could share your own cultural reference, people that looked like you, and that if you had a very hard day in court, you could, which might have had a racial undertone, you could come back to a set of chambers where everybody else could kind of understand that and support you in that. But those people really were pioneers at a time when being black at the bar was really difficult. And there are some difficulties still now, but back then, yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. And Mark, I know that, you know, through the conversations we've had, you've always thought about those who came before and standing on the shoulders of giants. Why is that so important to you? As you know, you're 5 years into the profession now, but why is it so important to you and a part of your journey?
To me, there was a lot of names that I used to hear when I started out, especially Rudy Narayan and the stories and his, how can I say, exploits. And I was absolutely fascinated by those guys. And it's like, because of the social media and where we are now and the LinkedIn, as you know, that I heavily utilize, as do you, a lot of the new bar and the generation that have come about now just simply are not familiar with those guys that were called in the 60s, the 70s and the 80s. Unless you dig deep, you simply would not know. There's a disconnect. So as far as a lot of the well-known black counsel now is guys like yourself, the Lorianne Power KC, the Melanie Simpson KC, the Gary Green KC, and that particular generation. And obviously everyone knew of Courtney Griffiths, KC, you know, God rest his soul. But the point is that after Courtney, or before Courtney rather, no one doesn't really no one's really aware of what was before. And so for me, it was important to highlight those kind of people.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Yeah. That never happens live on my show where the mobile goes off.
Oh.
That's
Probably
I
Alex.
thought that was going to be me, but there
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah, it's just as well we're not in court, because I would have got a reprimand. But sorry, yes, Mark, you're absolutely right. And I know that we have to think about those who came before, and it's only through research that we find out these great pioneers. And when we talk about our own struggles, and I remember how long it took for me to get a pupillage and then to get tenancy. But then I think about those who came before and what they must have gone through, and we all have our own stories. But let me ask you this, Nicola, in terms of inspiring you to enter the profession, was there anyone who inspired you to enter the legal profession particularly?
Yes, actually somebody who's not in the legal profession, who is my late father. I say that because both my parents are Guyanese, and when they came to this country, my father actually wanted to study for the bar. He was a police officer in Guyana. He had a very good friend, Keith Messiah, who became the Attorney General of Guyana. He had come to England to study, and he was going to do the same thing. And his idea was that he would join the police force and then study for the bar part-time, as a lot of people could do in those days. Well, they had a colour bar in the police force at the time that he came, which didn't, and I say that without fear of contradiction, which existed until 1968. And so he didn't get a chance to do that. And so his plans got a bit derailed in terms of studying for the bar. He did, in those days, he could do the part 1 and part 2s, really going back into hinterland. So he did the part 1s, but you have a young family and things get a bit derailed. So he ended up being a court clerk at the Industrial Tribunal for London South. And he did other things as well. One day I'll write a story about his life, including being in the government in Guyana too, as a junior minister in the Guyana government. But certainly in his time in England, he was a court clerk at the Industrial Tribunal, and he really wanted me to go to the bar. Now, I'm not doing this to fulfill his wishes. I wanted to do it as well. I found myself as a kid in school being a bit, blurred is a term that people use now, and black nerd, but they didn't then. You were just considered sort of weird. But I was really quite quiet, except if I had to do debates, or if I had to speak up on behalf of somebody else. And that made me really want to do that for a profession. He was very keen on that. And so he was my first inspiration, not the only one, but he was my first one, in the teeth of teachers saying, well, put it this way, the bar was not anything remotely what they thought that I would have achieved. Not the teachers in Guyana and not my parents, but the school that I was at the time. Thankfully, I didn't listen to anything like that. My saddest, my one regret is that my father saw me get called to the bar, but he didn't get to see me being appointed as a recorder, because he knew that I got the appointment, but he didn't get to see me being sworn in, because sadly he died in between. But he knew that I got the appointment, and that makes that very special for me, extra special.
That's wonderful. And Mark, you won't mind me saying that your route into the law was not the traditional route, whatever that means. But the fact is, you had an interesting journey into the law. Was there anyone who particularly inspired you? What was it that led you into this profession?
Do we have to really go there?
Well, you don't have to.
No. Honestly, I just essentially it was, as you know, I represented myself in a court case in Woolwich Crown Court in 2014, where a false assault allegation where Gary Green, KC, was the original barrister. He was a junior back then who was meant to represent me. He was the man in demand, excellent first-class barrister, and I say he thoroughly deserves silk. But his trial overran, and so I just, a moment of madness, call it God, what you will, and I decided to represent myself. I had a trial and retrial, and acquitted on the second time round, and the officer arrested me, suggested that I'd become an accredited police rep. One thing led to another. I got taken on by Musi Robinshaw as a probationary police rep. I had no qualifications, A-levels or GCSEs, kind of ended up being railroaded into doing a law degree. I didn't know what I was doing, and then I ended up graduating with a high T1 training contract in my second year. I did that. I'm not really sure I should have done it. I had no regrets, but I much would have preferred to do the bar course. I did it. I left my training contract early. I hated being a solicitor. Litigation is not my thing. Advocacy. I'm a natural advocate, and I became a freelance solicitor advocate, having never worked in a firm as a qualified solicitor ever, and then transferred to the bar after 3 months. Put my papers in. Old head of chambers, which me and you were members of. Back my application to the hilt, and then I was called to the bar on the 30th of November, 2020, and I've only ever been a solicitor for 5 months, and been a bar and completed total exemption from pupillage because I had my higher rights, but being at the bar is all I've really ever known. But it's the advocacy side of things is where I thrive, but the people that has inspired me back then, you know what, I can't really say anyone because I came from such a non-traditional background. There was no one, and I think it was a good thing because I think I learned on my feet. So the people that are around me, if I'm being honest with you, and I know this is your show, mate, but it was you and Kevin Metzger.
Oh wow!
like if I'm honest with you, like how to conduct yourself in court, how to be, mature black men, and how the integrity that you and Kevin showed me, and Barrett and Horn as well, is second to none. I never had any Courtney Griffiths. Like I learned about him later. It was use free, and I looked at that website at Great James Street, and it was you, it was Kevin, and it was Burton, and I was like, I'm sold. And yeah, also Paul Edwards as well, man. It was you guys. You guys were my uncles. I'm like 10 years older than Paul Edwards, but I still looked up to him. You know what I mean? And and me and you were not that a million miles apart in age, but it was if anything, you guys you've been the biggest inspiration to me, which is why I'm on this show. Otherwise, I'd be having my dinner right now.
Look, I appreciate both of your time. I appreciate your comments, Mark.
And Mark, when are you going to write your autobiography? I'm just riveted by what you said.
In God's time.
Okay. Well, I think God's time might be quite soon. So, yes.
It's an absolute story that I think will serve as great inspiration to many, Mark. And so, I would certainly encourage you to do that. I want to talk about, we talked about challenges that those who came before us faced, and we can all, as I say, talk about our own personal challenges. I read somewhere, actually, as part of my research, that Len Woodley would often be stopped by police whilst driving an open-top car. And there was one occasion where another judge reported him to security in the temple, wondering why a black man was parking in the lot reserved for benchers. And so you just hope and pray that things have moved on. I mean, Nicola, you're a bencher, and I've recently become a bencher in a temple. Nicola, are there any particular challenges that you faced early on, and how did you overcome them? Just as a way of inspiring those who are starting out.
God. Well, crikey, depends how far back you want to go. I mean, even one interesting one, which is pre the bar, but I always like to tell people this one, was when I was doing my A levels. I was doing English, French, and German. Then I dropped the German to do history because I wanted to be even though I love the law, that wasn't my first choice. I was going to do languages and work as a translator for the UN. And then I was very interested in fashion design and all that kind of stuff. But in any event, I was doing 3 A levels, and I was telling my careers teacher about what I wanted to do, which all involved going on to university. And she looked me dead in the eye and told me, "Oh no, I don't think you should do that. I think you should go and work for Woolworths."
Oh, that story.
Yeah, that story. Yeah, sorry, you've heard it. Yeah, but the irony is, I mean, then she said, "Oh no, well, if you don't want to work for Woolworths, you should go and become a nurse." And no shade on nurses, but she wasn't thinking about nurses with qualifications. She was thinking about back then, you could leave school at 16 and be a sort of, I don't know, basic grade nurse. And so ultimately, when I next and the last time I came across her was when I was at the end of my first year of my degree, and she saw me on a till in Croydon, and she assumed that was my job. And when I told her no, that was I was actually just finished my first year of my degree, she just disappeared off into the corner, and I never saw her again. And that's the reason why she's in Mrs. Cox. If she's still alive, that's the reason why she's in my first book. But in terms of other challenges, just sort of variously, quite a bit of sexual harassment, I have to say. And I think a lot of women barristers, and it still happens, as we know, because of the big inquiry that Harriet Harman reported on. But back then it was worse. And then when you overlay race and sex and the negative stereotypes that people have about Black women and sexuality, if you like. So I had to deal with a lot of that, and in one case fight someone off with regards to that. In terms of, then there are people that automatically assume that you weren't a barrister. I remember I used to practice in crime and civil, and I had a very thriving police misconduct practice. And I remember going up to Sheffield to do a case, and I went into the robing room, and someone looked at me, suited and booted with my wig and my bag and everything, and looked at me and said, "This is the robing room, you lost." And yeah, it turned out that was my opponent, and I beat him. So that was very satisfying. It was incredibly satisfying, that one. But there are lots of instances like that. As you get more experience, they happen less often, but you would be naive in the extreme to believe that they don't still happen. And, things just morph. They don't necessarily, people aren't going to be in your face racist, if you like, but it will just morph into a different way of showing itself. But the fact of the matter is, anybody that has ever given me a hard time, I've seen them all off. So that is very satisfying.
Thanks, Nicola. Mark, I mean, there's recently called, relative to Nicola and myself, but 5 years in, have you faced any challenges that you're able to talk about? And if you haven't, that's fine. But we talk about things changing. Have you faced any particular challenges?
All right. So I think not really challenges. Look, my journey into the bar has been phenomenal. Like, generally everyone's welcomed me with open arms. I've not really, I think, directly say that I can attribute to race, save for a few, which I call it. I mean, mostly, you've heard the old one about the being accused of being the defendant at court.
Oh yeah.
Me, what I had when I was starting out, because remember it was lockdown and we was all at the magistrates. I'd always be accused of being the officer in the case, the OIC. So anytime I turn up, "Are you the officer in the case?" And it was every flipping time. I'm like, I know I'm a big guy, 6 foot plus and everything. So I'm thinking, like, do I look like I'm some kind of detective constable? And so I was really starting to get worried. So there was that. And then, one member of the bar did try to tell a racist joke and tried to go hide behind the thin veil that he was gay, so he had the right to say such a joke. I did shut him down, and I did make a complaint, but then he drew the mental health card, so he kind of go away. It was a big deal, and it wasn't a big deal. But in terms of that kind of structural, institutional racism, I've been really blessed. I get on with the vast majority of judges. There's only one judge that I've fallen out with, where I was going to make a complaint, and again, that was because their personality. I would be grieved to say it was down to the fact that it was because I was Black. It's just that, I'm not going to say my opinions of them, but it's not necessarily someone that you'd see me having a drink with at the bar, put it that way. But I honestly think I've heard horror stories, and again, I guess it's my demeanor and my personality. So I kind of have been fortunate to avoid a lot of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that there was a report in 2021, and then there was the Race at the Bar 2024 report, and things seem to be going in the right direction. I think we have to look at the stats and agree that, there seems to be improvement. I read that overall representation of minority ethnic barristers at the bar is improving by about 0.5 percentage points a year. It's now 16.9% of the bar. But black and black British barristers are less likely to get immediate tenancy. The most likely to go on to do a probationary tenancy, and the most likely initially to become a squatter. And I hark back to 1993, and I remember how many third, sixth pupiliges I had to do, and then eventually get a tenancy. I think it was almost two years after finishing. So that problem still seems to be there. But we're talking about black excellence, and we're
also. Sorry, Stephen. Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I'm really heartened to hear that things have improved, because it would be remiss of any of us to say that things haven't improved. Maybe they should improve more, but they have improved.
They
but
have.
I think that I think those yes, but I think that the next big line is in judicial diversity.
Oh, well, I was coming on to that.
Yeah. So, all right.
We are going to tackle that. We are going to tackle that. And in fact, since we've arrived there, let's look at it, because the report also revealed that there's been an increase since 2020-21 in terms of the number of silks appointments. So Asian silks in total, 102 in total, which is an increase by almost a third. Those of mixed and multiple ethnicities, 53, which is more than doubled. There are, however, still only, according to these stats, only 8 black women's silks, the same number as reported in the 2022 progress report. And the total number of black cases remains at, read here, 26. If we talk about the judiciary, well, the figures are even more stark. I mean, we recently had the appointment of Miss Justice Obi to the High Court bench, which was a tremendous achievement. But in terms of representation in the judiciary, we are severely lacking. Nicola, you sit as a recorder. Have you got any comments to make about this?
I think it's absolutely disgraceful. I think that I don't know whether, well, I'm sure you know, because you know everything, but
I know.
Last year at the Association of Women Judges Conference, there was a particular discussion about race and racism in the judiciary at all levels. As a result of that discussion, as a result of some people just thinking, look, we've got to try and do something about this, time for talking is over. There is now the UK Association of Black Judges, which started on the 1st of July of this year. So it's very nascent. So we don't know really what's going to come of that. But the reason why that started was because that figure, that percentage figure of black as distinct from Asian judges had not moved. The dial hadn't moved for over a decade. And that's the reason why that was started. So now, why judicial diversity is important is because any one of us, you kind of hope you'll never be in front of a judge, but you might be. And any one of us could be in front of a judge, not necessarily for criminal things, but for anything. If you're going to have faith in the process, it would help to know that somebody that looks like you is on the bench. You don't automatically have to get that, and you don't automatically have to have that in order to have faith in the process. But if all you're reading about is that there are no black judges, or vanishingly few black judges, how on earth do you expect anyone to have any faith in a decision, whether it's a housing matter, a criminal matter, a family court matter, a commercial matter, if the profession itself is not diverse? And that's why I think that is really important. And it's we're talking about with Margaret's appointment, where she now becomes Dame Margaret Obi, with her appointment, and then with Barbara Mills becoming chair of the bar, both highly deserved appointments. On the one hand, there is progress, but on the other hand, there's still more progress to be made. So there's no room for complacency. Not that any of us on here are complacent, but if anyone outside of this or watching this was thinking that all battles are won, they haven't been.
Well, I'm going to return to the judiciary and actually applying to sit as a judge, and hope that you can give us some insight into that process that you went through. But Mark, I do want to ask you, because obviously, you know, I was a young lad growing up in Croydon who switched on the television I think 10 or 12 years of age, and saw a program called Crown Court, and I was in awe of it.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Not because I saw any of the advocates were black, but I was taken in by the advocacy and the court dress. There were no black lawyers. In fact, the only black people on the show were defendants. But that said, Black Silk, I think, remains the only British television series to focus on the experiences of black lawyers. It's, I think, based partly on the cases of Rudy Narayan, who in 1977 published A Black Community on Trial. And you, Mark, and to your credit, you know, as a junior member of the bar, and I say that, you know, with all respect, you came up with this concept of Black Silk and Black Excellence, and to launch this initiative. And I wanted to ask you, what was it that inspired you to do that? And when we talk about Black Silk and Black Excellence, what are you referring to?
So in terms of the Black Silk, it was just, I was just fascinated by the stories of Rudy Narayan. So Kevin used to tell me endless stories about Rudy's exploits in court, and his advocacy was absolutely outrageous. I mean, you think that Courtney Griffiths done some stuff like Rudy's, you know, about him, you know, getting up in court and going and sitting in the dock with the defendant and telling the judge, well, you speak to me like the defendant, so I might as well go and sit in the dock with him. And in front of a jury. I mean, the stuff that he stuck it to the man in a way that, like, I'm just astounded. And I'm not sure if that could be done again, but there was that. And you know, even anyone who's been around a certain time would just constantly tell me about Rudy Narayan. So I Googled him, and then Black Silk, the show, just came up, and then Rudolph Walker came up. Yeah. And so I went digging, and as some of your viewers may not know, that I was a presenter on BBC Radio and Extra for years, and I've still done bits and bobs. I've done TV shows with BBC and sporadic work with them, so I was able to get some of the shows from the archives and view them for myself. And so I was really inspired by this. So I just wanted to do something. I managed to reach out to Rudolph Walker, who come on board. He was on the panel at the first Black Silk, and he attended the last one the other day, and me and him have remained in touch, and he's one of the most loveliest, humble guys you will ever meet. And he was very close with Rudy and Courtney as well, and I think John Roberts as well. But he, you know, so there was that aspect of things. But in terms of the Black Excellence kind of thing, I mean, we call ourselves Black Silk, but in terms of, if you're saying anything about Black Excellence, it's the kind of, it's so important that we recognize that our achievements within the profession and do for ourselves, because sadly, my own personal belief is no one else is going to do it for us. And you have to understand that, look at the times we're living in. We've got MPs, members of parliament, who are saying that they're not happy, that it drives them mad for seeing us just in adverts on TV. That's just TV. How do you think it would drive them if they're seeing us in the judiciary or in a wig and gown in court? Because they're not going to like that. And the way the country is going, and we're following states, the diversity and inclusion is going to could be potentially dismantled on every level. And we have to prepare ourselves for that. All of these gains, because let me be very clear about this, is that a lot of people have engaged with these diversity initiatives, certain chambers. It's nothing but lip service, and they do it because they have to. They don't want to. And the moment that these things are no longer in law, the moment that they no longer have to, we will end up right back how the bar was for you guys, especially you, Nicola, back in 1985. You know, all of this George Floyd, and they're with us. They're not, because, as you said, Black peoples are the first not to get taken on. I've seen it time and time again with my friends where, oh, you've not met the required standard of advocacy. And these chambers know what they do. They'll take them on, not give them a proper pupillage experience, not pair them with the right kind of people supervisor, and then let them go and then put them into third, sixth purgatory. This is what goes on. And the moment that they no longer have to do this, the moment that diversity and inclusion is a dirty word, which may well come, you know, we need to prepare ourselves for that. So Black Silk as an organization, it is so important to have something of our own. But in my last point, I go further with this, because my ultimate view for Black Silk is to have, hopefully we've mooted things like the Courtney Griffiths Cup, some other initiatives that we want to do, and maybe a more of a social event as well. But I want to do diversity the way it ought to be done, which means that we will be catering for students with disabilities, which means that we will be catering for our Jewish friends that are often forgotten, which means that we will be catering for, and I'm going to say this loudly, white students as well, from working class backgrounds who have often been marginalized. Because let me be very clear on this next point. When this diversity in inclusion is dismantled, it would not be the people that are screaming and angry at the moment that are tired of seeing blackface or whatever, because they will get nothing as well. It will go back to the middle and upper middle class white people that have always benefited from the law. So my vision of things is to be an all-inclusive thing, to bring everybody, but to obviously highlight Black excellence, but to say that, you know, we're not the gatekeepers, but we will show you how diversity should be done. So hope that answers it. Bit of a long answer, but yeah.
No, thanks, Mark.
I certainly will, in terms of what you said about diversity initiatives being dismantled, I think, sadly, I will co-sign with you on that. I think what's happened is that there was a George Floyd bounce when that happened, and everyone was on board then. And then there's been a slow erosion since then. And I think the thing is, it's like with any gain. It's like, I was going to say like a war, but I don't want people to get the wrong impression if I say that on your program, Steve. But any gain that you make can be eroded if you don't. You have to be constantly vigilant to make sure the gain doesn't get eroded. And that's where we are at the moment. I mean, if we have people saying things like they don't want to see Black and brown faces on TV because there's too many of them, and the leader of that particular party does not want to call it racist, which is exactly what it is. And there's a general shift to the right, which is a little bit concerning. It's how it will impact not just us as Black people, as you say, Mark, but other people are going to be impacted by this as well. It might impact us first, but a lot of other people are going to be impacted by this, and they probably won't see it until it's too late.
Exactly.
Well, I certainly do know that there is a great concern about the lack of Black members of the judiciary, and there's an active steps are being taken to look at why this is. I know that I'm going to be part of a working party looking at this coming up in the next couple of months. Look, I didn't write this report. I'm just reading the stats, but some other stats which have come out from the report, it says this, that in all areas of practice, so it's not just criminal law, in all areas of practice and at all stages of careers, from young bar to silk, Black and Asian barristers are earning less than their white colleagues. It also says 2/3, 65% of white barristers said that work was distributed fairly at their chambers or employers, compared with only 4 in 10, that's 43% of those from minority ethnic backgrounds. And then, of course, when we talk about the judiciary, in 2023, 2024, of the 4,714 courts and tribunal judges imposed who declared information on ethnicity, 529, that's 11%, were from a minority ethnic background, and 4,185, that's 89%, were white. Now, obviously, we take into account that we only make up 4% of the population, but in terms of our representation in the judiciary, I think I'm right in saying, well, I know there's only one current Black High Court judge who we've alluded to, recently appointed, but I can't think of more than 10 Black circuit judges sitting. I can't think of more than 10.
I can't think of more than 10 either. So.
No. And Nicola, you sat as a recorder now, and for those people who don't know, a recorder is a part-time judge with all the rights of a circuit judge, pretty much. And Nicola's been sitting for a very long time. Nicola, just share with us the experience of applying for that position and what you would say to those who aspire to become a recorder.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd say if you want to do it, absolutely apply for it. And that, because there are people who will talk themselves out of it. Oh, I don't think I'm as good as the next person that they're looking at. Believe me, you will be as good, and you might even be better. But so a lot of that is self-belief, as well as, but you know, that's not, there are potential barriers in the way, but some people will take themselves out of the race before they even put their hat in the race. In terms of how to apply, I'm afraid it's different. The whole process is different from when I did it. Yeah. I can certainly talk about when I did it. It was a 5-stage process. I remember the stage I remember distinctly was because the first thousands of people applied, and back then they were only doing 3 rounds of recruitment every decade. And I remember the first 2 stages were sort of a paper sift, a long application, and lots of referees. And the third stage, the middle stage, was to sit an exam. And back then, you know, everyone had to like physically sit it. And they hired all the big hotels in London. They hired all the ballrooms and put people in there to sit the exam. And only the top 10% of people were taken right off the top. And only those 10% got through that stage 3. Then there was a practical interview where you have people a bit like Strictly at the side, Strictly Come Dancing, marking your homework as you actually, you know, how do you deal with a difficult list officer? How do you deal with a difficult defendant or person in the witness box whose phone goes off in the wrong time? No shade, Steve. Just, you know, that kind of thing. And it winnows down to 128 people. Now, I know that it's different now. And then you have to do a week-long judicial course, residential course after that. So I know that it's different now, but the same competencies are tested. And I think it's the thing that I would say to anybody, if they think that they're not intellectually strong enough to do it. First of all, I say, well, if you're a barrister, you've been practicing for at least 7 years, yes, you are intellectually strong enough to do it. But what they test is judgecraft, not your actual intellect, because you have the books there. But it's how you manage things, your intuitive sense about how to deal with cases, being prepared to be quite bold in many ways about how you sentence within guidelines. But if you're going to take an unusual route for sentencing, to come below the tariff or above the tariff, because I am very reluctant personally to send anyone to prison for the first time if I can avoid it. There's some offences where you can't, but I do think, particularly for a young person, sending them to prison for the first time is like crossing a Rubicon. So you really want to try to avoid that if at all possible. So it's all of those things that make it up. I mean, I love it, and I love being a recorder. And in case you're about to ask, I love being a recorder. I don't particularly want to be a full-time circuit judge. It let me be careful because of where the program is going out. It's not that it doesn't appeal to me, but in terms of the things that I'm doing with my life, including writing, it's to fit all of those in. Bottom line, you can't write crime fiction and have the time to do that properly and sit full-time as a judge. It's just not going to work. So so for me, this is the happiest balance in my working life probably ever, actually. So absolutely.
No, I hear that. I'm going to ask you in a moment about your writing exploits, if I can put it that way.
Of course, yeah.
Author. But Mark, let me just go back to Black Silk. In fact, Lyndon, one of my dear friends who watches the show, he's asked, is there a website for Black Silk? Now, I don't know if there's a website for what you do, but I certainly know that if he wants to watch Black Silk, the original production, it is available with Rudolph Walker, and you can actually watch it and enjoy it all the way.
Oh, well, no, it's not available, actually.
It's not available?
No, it's not. BBC need to re-release it, obviously, because of my contacts and who I worked for, is why I had access to it as BBC, ex-BBC employee, but unfortunately, I'm not able to share that, and it's not on YouTube.
Wow.
I mean, maybe someone might have leaked it, but it most certainly wouldn't be me. Again, it's something that we do intend to press the BBC for to release them and put them on iPlayer. But there's not much more that we can do for that than that, I'm afraid.
Right. Well, I'd like to hope that Rudolph could use his influence. He's very popular on EastEnders, and with his back catalogue, certainly the BBC would listen to him if he asked for one of his previous shows to be re-released. So we live in hope. But just for people who don't know, I mean, I've been to both of the events, which I thought were excellent, not least apart from the wonderful food that was served at the last event. But for people who don't know, Mark, what does the evening entail? What do you seek to achieve by having this event? And also, I should say this, yes, it's called Black Silk, but it's open to everybody. And I saw some very dear colleagues of mine who are white in the profession who were there and supporting. I want to get that out there. But Mark,
totally inclusive environment, as I said, and as I said, for next year we're going in further that we're going to ensure that people with disabilities are able to prioritize to come in, and also we serve food as well after the event, and so we're going to have a dedicated kosher session for our friends in the Jewish community, because we're all inclusive as well. So there'll be regular food, there'll be vegan food, there'll be halal section and a kosher section as well. So it will be for everyone. But the evening in and of itself is a panel discussion introduced by senior barrister Alex Taylor-Camara, who's the chair of the organization.
Yeah.
And then it's hosted by Lorianne Power and Jason Pitter Casey. And so they host and moderate the evening, and we have selected panelists. We've had Professor Leslie Thomas Casey, Keir Monteith Casey, Martin Ford Casey, Nekaka Dolu Casey, Ika Pert Casey, Alison Monroe Casey, Anesta Weeks Casey. Who else is there? We obviously Rudolph Walker on the first panel, and we had Kevin Metzger on the first panel as well, and Judy Khan Casey as well, who sits as a judge at the Old Bailey. But they reminisce, they talk about their experiences at the bar, what Nicola has shared, all of the experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, how things were, the things they had to overcome, how they see things going forward, and encouraging people to apply for Silk. And then after the panel discussion, it really is a quite honest discussion. It's not for the faint-hearted. And then after we've spent an hour and a half with that, then we break for authentic Caribbean cuisine. So this year we Graves, and I actually, one of my proudest moments, I actually created the menu myself for them.
Oh, wow.
But the chefs got it down to a T. Maximum respect to Grace for what they achieved. And we had jerk chicken skewers, plantain skewers, hardo bread, freshly baked. We had patties for all sides, and the pièce de résistance rum punch.
Yeah, that was very
authentic. So it was, and so we have authentic Caribbean cuisine. So it's not just a piece of chicken with a bit of reggae sauce poured over it. No, we ensure the food is proper, and then everyone gets together. But again, it's diverse. We had loads of members from my chambers there, and everyone is welcome, and we come together and we celebrate Black culture, because I'd like to get to a point where, although it's Black culture, it's all our culture at the bar. It'd be nice that we're all one legal family, and so we all come together, which is going forward for me, again, is why it's so important to reach out to those disabled people that sometimes think that they're not going to have access to get into venues. It's so important to get them there. And obviously we have loads of friends in the Jewish community. My great grandmother was Jewish, and so for me it's important to make sure that is equally represented as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Nicola, let me just return back to this thing of excellence in the judiciary. And in fact, I just reflected on reading out these stats. I'm not sure how many silks there are in total. I think there's around 2,000 silks, just over in total. But when I reflect that there are only 26 black silks, and even less in the judiciary, when we look, Nicola, some people might say, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, that of course it's all based on ability and merit. And some people might say, well, the fact that there are so few, it just reflects that people perhaps have not reached the standard that they need to reach in order to hold these lofty positions. I'm sure there are people who would say that.
Sorry, what you want my opinion on that? I think people, if someone is prepared to say that, which effectively what they'll say is what they would be saying behind that, but wouldn't be bold enough to say it, is that Black people do not have the intellectual clout or the intellectual heft to apply for judicial positions and be appointed to same. If you're dealing with someone like that, there's no point even arguing with them, because that's coming from a whole different place. That's not coming from a place of fairness at all. The one thing I will say is that there are people like Lady Justice Whipple, for example, not just her, who are really trying to make a difference, have seen that needle hasn't moved in over a decade, and are really trying to make a difference with regards to that. And on the, I think you were there actually, Steve, when they had the launch at the Supreme Court. That was really moving for me, because Her Honor Judge Dangor, who was my judicial mentor, and who was the first Black, first Black person, or first Black woman, I think first Black person actually, to sit as a circuit judge in England and Wales. And she came, and we were both a bit tearful. I always get tearful when I see her, because she's a good friend, but also I remember how encouraging she was to me. But also to think that she was around still to be able to see this, and to see it celebrated in the Supreme Court, and see that Lady Hale, for example, came down from Richmond in order to be there.
Yes.
I very much proud of my book, so that always helps. So that's a big deal. That is a really big deal to have that organization set up. Now, it's only just been set up, and no one is under any illusions about the mountain of work that will have to be done in order to regularize that. But to your devil's advocate question, if someone genuinely thinks that, they are really trying to put up some sort of straw man argument to justify the lack of Black people on the bench. And if they think that, well, that's coming from a place that you don't even want to argue, because they're not interested in a diverse bench. They're just not.
Yeah, well, I always liken it to football management. The number of players who play in the Premier League who are Black, and how many Black managers have there been? But I suppose that's an argument for another day when we're talking about football. But Mark, look, you've created quite a stir on your LinkedIn platform. You have a huge amount of followers. I think you've even got more than me, which makes me jealous. Only joking. But no, seriously, look, you've got quite a big footprint. And one thing I do love about you is that you do look back and you constantly remind those who are more junior about the sacrifices and the paths trodden by those who came before. What would you say to young Black law students who want to see themselves reflected in the profession? How would you encourage them? What would you say to them? I know you speak to many.
You need to aim for excellence, and I say it a million times. If you want to come to the bar, you need to just ensure that your grades, you need to get a first, because that's a filtering system. I do the pupillage shift, and generally, if you're not getting a first, unless your CV is off the chart, it's it's going to be difficult. 2-1 is a good standard, but CV, but you still need the CV to back it. And then I also say that a 2-2, unless you've got some serious mitigating circumstances, it's so difficult. No one ever judges you off your bar course grades. So whether you've got outstanding or whether you've just got competent, no one actually cares. If you're GDO, no one cares if you got distinction. What they care about is your undergraduate classification. That is the be all and end all. And the caveat to that is, and I hate to say this, if you've gone to Oxbridge, if you've gone to Harvard or Yale, then it might not matter whether you've got a first or not. Just the fact that you've gone to them institutions ticks a box, because it's an elitist profession. But save for that, any other institution, even if it's LSE, which is probably, I've heard, doing better than Oxbridge or Durham, you really need to get a first. Build your CV around it, as much experience as possible. think outside the box, but it is hard. On balance, it's probably easier to get a training contract, especially if you're a criminal practitioner at a criminal firm, because the bureaucracy to get a pupillage, it is so difficult. The way that chambers can only recruit once a year, they have to get dispensations. I was a solicitor first. When I did my training contract, they offered it to me. They phoned up the SRA on a Friday. It cost them £100. They offered it to me on the Monday. You don't need to advertise to offer a training contract to anyone. Literally, a partner can just say, "I like you. You can start your training contract next week." It's so obviously the magic circle firms, because the amount of applicants but a smaller high street firm, the bureaucracy is not attached to it. Whereas the bar, because the amount of nepotism and obviously the people just looking after their own occurred, that's why it's so tight. Also, in your day, as I understand it, and Nicola as well, it was unfunded pupillages. So you might get a pupillage, but you weren't getting a tenancy at the end of it. Now it's the other way around, where it's so difficult. So look, don't give up, don't be deterred, but you have to understand the profession that you're trying to get into. So you need to look at potential exemptions. I also tell people as well about academic exemptions. Whereas, if you wanted to, if you're really academic, you could go the PhD route. As long as you've got a publication, that could potentially exempt you from a pupillage. And also, if you want experience rather than the usual mini pupillages and working as a paralegal, I also encourage people to become a lay bencher, so magistrates, because as we know, criminal magistrate who sits in a criminal magistrate's court, they would basically see 97% of all criminal cases pass through their doors, all the bail applications, the sending process, they would decide and adjudicate on. You only sit for 14 days a year, and it's a 3-day training course. Again, you don't have to be legally qualified. Anybody can do it, and they are crying out, or at the moment, they're crying out for black and brown people, and so it's a good time to apply. I did encourage one guy who used to work in a tire fitting shop to do it, or I encouraged his brother to do it, and he's now a tenant in the chambers in the Midlands. So he took my advice.
That's amazing.
Well, there you are.
His CV, and he got pupillage at the end of it.
Wow.
Albeit the CPS.
Nicola, let me just ask you, I mean, it's phenomenal. So you sit as a recorder, but now you have this other career, if you like, as an accomplished author. How have you combined your profession with the writing, and what was it that inspired you to become an author?
Well, I think the combining is, I would put it down to two things. First of all, I'm a kind of overachieving child of immigrants. There you go. There is that. As a real thing, the immigrant drive is a real thing, actually. And the other thing is I don't like to be bored, which is the reason why, I mean, not only was I at the bar, but I as you know, I left private practice and I became an ombudsman, including, investigating police misconduct here, investigating anti-corruption in the Cayman Islands, coming back and dealing with, the deep cut type cases in defense. And all of those are challenging their own different ways. But I think, so I don't like to be bored, and I'm a kind of massive overachiever, I guess. But in terms of writing, I've always loved creative writing. I was that kind of nerdy, quiet, introverted teenager that wrote a lot of angst-ridden poetry. But then when I wrote my first book, it was when I was in full-time private practice. And that was a crazy time because I was writing between midnight and 4 a.m. whilst I was in practice. And there's a reason why there's a big gap in between the first book and the second book, because I couldn't do that longer than I did it for a year, and I don't even know how I did it. I absolutely don't know how I did it. Certainly couldn't do it again after that. But I wanted to tell a story centering a black barrister, because because she's based on me as a black woman barrister. But really, I wanted to center a black barrister in what is still quite an elitist profession, even more so when I wrote my first book, and just deal with big ethical questions that come up, like the classic, which I know Mark would have had, that how can you represent someone you know is guilty? You know, that classic one. And then, so my first book was based on that. The second book was how can you represent someone that everybody else thinks is guilty and has committed a really heinous offence, but maybe, just maybe, they didn't do it, particularly when the person is a corrupt, bigoted police officer, and you have a black woman barrister representing them. So, and then the third one was about the dynamics within chambers and the power of the chambers clerk, which, because a lot of people outside the profession don't really know about that.
Yeah.
So I love doing it, but you know, there's a difference between writing as a hobby and writing as a job. When you have a book deal and there is interest in TV options, all that kind of stuff, you know, that's when you have to really, really take it seriously. So that's why I sit and I write, and anything else has to come around the edges of that.
Right. Thank you. Wow, Nicola. Well, I think I can say that all those books are available in good bookshops and Amazon, I'm sure.
Yes, they are. Go buy them. You know,
go buy them.
Have to eat.
Absolutely. Look, we're coming towards the end. I just want to ask this question, Mark. You know, when you get further down the road and you're about to hang up your wig and gown, what legacy do you hope to leave?
Improve access to the profession for all people from working class backgrounds. I think social mobility is a key for me. I think the fundamental underlying problem that's just not addressed in the UK is a class problem. Race is a problem, but class problem. And if we address class as well, that so much problems that we're having at the moment just wouldn't be there. But they conveniently pitch certain groups against each other because you don't look up and then you don't see the real issues, which is class. So that's my legacy, I think, that I'd like.
Wonderful. Nicola, any final comments?
I think for me, it would be, I go into schools and I speak to young people. I do it for Speakers for Schools, but I would go into any school and speak to young people, as long as it's an ethnically diverse school. And I would just want to say to anybody who wants to come into the profession, no matter what area they wish to practice in, is that you can do it. If I did it, then you can do it. You know, I'm not, you know, I'd like to think I'm a special unicorn, but honestly, if I did it, you can do it. And I really want to encourage it and open it up as much as possible.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Mark. So, look, you know, we're talking about black excellence, and we talk about the judiciary, we talk about silk, and I just want to acknowledge those who have reached that rank of KC, and I include Gary Green, Laurie Ann Power, Mel Simpson, Brian St. Louis, Barbara Mills, Nneka Akudulu, Harry Matabu, Alison Monroe, Michelle Nelson, Dean George, Leslie Thomas, Martin Ford, Oberon Sugby, Fidelis Odita, Susanna Johnson, Jason Pitter, and Keir Monteith, just to name a few. There's a majority there, but I salute all of you as we celebrate Black History Month and Black
There's a young lady, her last name is Badeja, but I can't remember her first name. She's silk as well.
Well, I include her too. And I say...
And Leslie was my pupil. That's really aging me now.
Wow, that really is.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
We acknowledge all of them, and we inspire those coming behind to aim high. It's not beyond you. And as Mark says, you need to check out the history of those who've come before, because if anything, they're remarkable stories, and what they endured should certainly inspire you. So as we come to the end of today's show, I want to leave you with this thought that, you know, excellence is not defined by the obstacles we face, but by the determination with which we rise above them. From the very first pioneers who entered the Inns of Court against all odds, to the present generation of black silks, judges and leaders of the profession, the message is clear. We belong here. Our contribution strengthens the bar, enriches the law, and ensures that justice is not only done, but seen to be done for every community in this country. And I dedicate this episode of Life in Focus to the memory of Dr. Courtney Griffiths, Michael Hall, and Leroy Redhead. I want to thank my guests, Mark Robinson, and I want to thank Nicola Williams, my two dear friends. Thank you to everyone for watching, and I hope that you will join me again on Life in Focus. My name is Stephen Akinsanya, barrister at 50 New Bridge Street, I'll see you next time. God bless you all. See you next time.
Bye.